Welcome to the Thriving Farmers Podcast, where our mission is to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming. We believe that you can build a profitable and sustainable farm that gives you true farm freedom. Join us as we talk to farmers, innovators, educators, and entrepreneurs to glean their top takeaways in business and life. In today's episode, we're going to talk about my background in farming. And we'll talk about starting our farm. We'll talk about how we ran it. We'll talk about some of the challenges we faced and mistakes we made. And we'll also talk about the decision in 2015 to shut it down. And so, that was challenging for me. That was a lot of thinking. But in the end, we decided that was the best decision for our family at that time. But I'll talk you through that and kind of where we went after that and, how that brought us to where we are with our company today. So, we started our farm back in 2003, but my love of vegetables, my love of all things outdoors started way before that. I was born in St. Louis, lived until I was about 6 years old. And even then, my mom has pictures of me with my hands covered with slugs, in front of our first tomato plant that we grew. We moved to Massachusetts when I was 6 years old, and we had a couple different gardens there. My dad really wanted to connect with us as kids. And he said, being outside with them, working with them on something that they're interested in, because we absolutely loved it, is something that he wanted to do. And we had several gardens. We obviously grew way too much squash our first year. We have pictures of it. We have pictures of actually taking a wheelbarrow of cherry tomatoes around to all the neighbors because we grew way too many of those as well. We grew corn in our little tiny backyard garden and thought that we could get, good germination and good pollination with that. We decided to grow carrots, and then after 7 days of them not germinating, we ended up planting something else there, only to have them germinate, 4 days after that. So we made all the mistakes, but we loved it. We enjoyed it. It was something that we did as a family together. We did it according to the John Jevons Double Dug book and the Victory Garden Kids book, which were, something I poured over many long hours when I was little. In 1999, we moved to upstate New York. So, my brother and I were, I think, 12 and 13 or 13 and 14 at that point. And our parents wanted to get us out of kind of suburbia and into the country so we could, stretch our legs a bit more. And also that was the time with the whole Y2K scare. So my dad was a little bit concerned about that. And so, we wanted to be outside of the city. So we moved up there and my parents purchased some land. Now, the land wasn't ideal for what we were doing, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it was adequate. And we started, growing on it and doing things. And at the beginning, we really didn't think that farming was going to be our sole livelihood. We'd been told so many times by so many different people, okay, if you want to make money, don't be a farmer, or, farmers don't make any money, or you can't make a livelihood at this. And so obviously my parents weren't telling me not to. They were completely open to me doing what I wanted, but I didn't have that dream of doing that because I didn't think it was possible. I think it was the Joel Salatin article in the Smithsonian magazine, I think around 2001, that really started getting my wheels turning on that this actually can be a profitable enterprise. And so when we started out, I started with some ducks and my brother started with chickens. And so we started with that. We ended up starting a hatchery and started hatching eggs. And at one point we had 300 ducks roaming our property. My mom hated that, but she put up with it. And, around that point, my brother started going to the farmer's market, started selling the eggs that we were producing because we produced a lot of eggs, and realized that, most of the people really wanted vegetables. Now, this farmer's market was one of those little curb markets. And so there was 4 or 5 vendors. We went down with our little 4-foot card table. We sold 4 dozen out of the 8 dozen eggs that we brought. And we thought, we were glad that we covered our costs for the market stall, which was a $5 market daily fee, and some of the feed costs. And those other vendors at that market were kind of our first mentors. So they're the ones that taught us you can plant lettuce more than once, or you can, plant a second planting in the fall of certain crops. But still, they were, the master gardener level. They weren't really doing this as a business. It was more of a hobby in their spare time. So that year, I believe it was 2003, 2004, we met a new farmer over in Vermont called Eric Pillemer. Now, Eric had a background he was a cancer doctor and quit that, decided he wanted to farm, and had been doing it a couple of years when he met us. He had a Goldoni rototiller that he actually wasn't using. And a Goldoni is basically an oversized, heavy-duty version of the BCS. Real rock star tiller. The only problem is it's very hard to get parts from Italy. So he actually traded us interning on his farm for that summer for buying the rototiller off of him. So That was great. We had a really heavy duty piece of equipment to till with. And he had 2 young backs, which were, very energetic and eager to work. And so that was great. Eric taught us all about spreadsheets, about succession planting, about the beginnings of organic farming. And so then that next year, we actually started going to some better farmers markets. We went to the Glens Falls Farmers Market. That's where we met Paul and Sandy Arnold. And they became, lifelong friends and excellent mentors as well. And so that first year at Glens Falls, I still really wasn't vegetable farming because I wanted to do it for a long-term livelihood. It was more about a way to earn money to do other things as a stepping stone. But by the end of that season, I really had kind of fallen in love with the entire aspect of it. And it was really that season that gave us the confidence that we could farm. You start out something, you make a couple $100 at a market, that's great. But it was really that market, I think it was in early June or late June when we first had our full table of product and we broke $1,000 in sales, that it made a huge difference in confidence and like, oh my gosh, I can actually do this. I could start doing multiple markets as long as I have a full table of stuff. We'll buy every single week. And so that was excellent for us. We first started out that first year, we had eggs and catgrass and wheatgrass on the table. And then we rapidly scaled that out. That fall, though, we were still learning, and so we didn't have that much product. And even though selling just carrots and beets and potatoes, we still did quite well. So that was kind of our first journey. And obviously, then we started adding more hoop houses and high tunnels and stuff like that. The following year, which was 2005, we were accepted into the Saratoga Farmers Market, which was a much bigger market. And so we made the difficult choice of actually dropping that Glens Falls market that next year, just to focus on the Saratoga market, which was 2 or 3 times bigger, and to focus on, growing the crops for that. Now, that year, our parents said, okay, you're really going to take this to the next level. We'll loan you $5,000 for the year, but it needs to be repaid in the fall. And we were able to do that very easily because we were really focused. And again, many hands make light work, as it were. We had a number of siblings, which we employed dutifully on the farm. I'm not so sure if they were, actually willingly employed, or is it more of slave labor at probably the wages we were paying at that point. But yeah, it was a great first couple of years as we kind of tried new things and figured new things out. And one of the cool things that we kind of focused on at the beginning, which really made a difference in our business and really helped us scale, was adding new high tunnels every single year. And so we were adding high tunnels as fast as we could. And because we were still living at home and still quite young, we were attending the Glens Falls market before my brother had a license. And so, that was a little challenging, making sure our parents were available to take us to markets. But as soon as we were able to, get those licenses, obviously that made it a lot easier. But, we were still young and we were able to plow all the profits right back into the business. And we were too young to know that we shouldn't do things. So we tried new things all the time. And a lot of the times they succeeded and worked. And so we were able to bring crops to our market earlier and earlier and be able to, do new things. So that was kind of the early years. And, 2006, we kind of went back into the Glens Falls market and the Saratoga market. And then we kind of grew on that. Now, 2005, I believe, was the first year we had a tractor. So we ended up, adding some land to the farm. We were like, hey, we need to grow more stuff. So we need to have more land, but we need to manage that. So we picked up an old Super C tractor, an International Super C, and we used that to pull a simple set of harrows. And then we actually started using that to pull wagons and mark beds. And eventually we bought basket weeders to weed with. So we started building out that tractor line as well. But really until we were about 4 or 5 acres, most of our tillage was being done by that Goldoni. And then we obviously went up to a rototiller, ended up buying our first compact tractor. And then eventually, and I think it was about 2010, 2011, we started buying some of our first larger tractors. So, in those early years, it was just us and our siblings. And then we started adding team members too. So the first hire was people just to pick vegetables. We were able to grow it. We just couldn't get them out of the field fast enough. So we hired a few local high school kids to come in and help us with harvest. And then it moved to more of, okay, we need more people to build this out. And so we added more team members. Some of the first hires there for those more longer term was when my brother actually stopped farming with me. So that was a couple years in. We just realized it wasn't working for the both of us to be focused on this. This really wasn't his thing. He was more focused on inside the books part of the business. And I was more the growing. And that just, he wanted to go on and do other things. He originally wanted to be a pilot. And so he went on to pursue that. And that's when we brought in our first bigger hire, which was someone who was going to take over the office and the book side of the business. Now, we were super lucky. We found a local woman who was looking for a job like this. She knew QuickBooks in and out. She'd managed some of the local stone quarry businesses in the past on the book side. And so she kind of, was looking for something she could do when she wanted. She had 2 young children at the time. And so she could just come in to do our books at 7:00 at night or, take them home and do them whenever she had a chance. So it worked out really well. She ended up coming on to work for us full time eventually when our business was a little bit larger. But it was a really scary step for us because that was kind of someone, it was a lot more than we'd been looking to pay other people in the past. Obviously, this was a lot more skilled work, running someone's books than just pulling carrots out of the ground, but still is kind of scary for us. The other original hires we made were Sue Barrett. Now, Sue came on and she said, hey, I'm done raising my kids. They're kind of into college now. I'm looking to kind of work part-time and I love vegetables. And we met her at the local farmer's market. And so we brought her on. She just worked a few hours now. We were still quite young at the point, so I'm sure she laughed at some of our antics. But what she moved into on the farm is managing all of the transplant production. So that was her domain. She did a lot of the pruning and she did the transplants. And we eventually moved her into, she set her own schedule that she came in when she wanted. And the whole, basically her key results areas are A's for, which is a term Dave Ramsey and EntreLeadership uses, which is your key results areas. So let's say, if you break the glass and have to kind of grab the final document of what I need to do for today, is her key result was keep the transplants flowing from the greenhouse into the field, make sure they're all started, make sure that the tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers and stuff get pruned in the greenhouses with help, of course. But that was kind of her thing. And we gave her the freedom that as long as we had the transplants we needed, she could completely set her own hours. So, most of the team would start at 7:00 in the morning, and that's when we get out and get going. She would come in when she wanted. She'd leave when she wanted. And that was kind of, her thing. And that worked out great for us. She was incredibly responsible. She went above and beyond with what she did and was always looking to take our transplant production to the next level, even though our transplant production areas were quite tapped for time and space. We had a very small facility for that, a greenhouse for that. And so she was always playing Tetris as she built that out. So that's kind of our big first hires. And then the year that really we took things to the next level was bringing on Erica, who we'll have her on for another episode here later in the season. Erica came on really, and she was one of our original CSA members, and she came on to help us at the farmers markets to just help there. And then she came to us and said, look, if I can take over your marketing for you, just kind of become your market manager, be responsible for hiring, really focus on, helping you build out your brand, I think we can take this to the next level. And she was a Army wife or a Navy wife. Her husband was at the base in Saratoga, so she had some free time, and she really just loved local organic food and loved us as a team and really put her heart and soul into helping us. So when she came on, that really took a big burden off of me because I was trying to do all the marketing, all the branding, writing the newsletters, and run the entire field crew. So bringing her on, and we just started trading for food, and then eventually we hired her as an hourly wage. But that really allowed us to grow as well, and that was a key hire for us. And the other thing she taught us was really the whole aspects of the E-Myth, of running things like a business. Her background was in managing large retail stores. And so she had, the experience for that and was able to kind of just shift that over to us and help us grow our farm. My brother and I both started deep into this when we were 15 and 16. So we had no college degree. We were just coming at this as, a lot of hard work and listening to our mentors most of the time, and reading a lot of books. And I eventually did go on and took a couple college classes on business and economics, and then realized, I can just read the books, or, our business is growing so fast, it's worth more of my time to spend it working in the business and on the business than just going to college. And so we kind of, after 2 classes, I shifted back to just working on the farm. And, that was one of the best decisions I ever made, because that, when I was 22 or 21, when most people were finishing college, I was running a 6-figure business with multiple employees and really headed to move the business to the next level. So a couple of bumps along the way. We had our land there, our original property, which was 8 acres, and the property was on the north side of a valley, so which was great, which we had southern exposure, it's great exposure. It had an incredibly steep driveway, so the first 600 feet of our 1,000-foot driveway was a steep hill, and that made it really challenging in the winter to get up. It made getting to market okay because you slid down the hill out to the main road, but actually getting back from market could be quite challenging. The thing about the nice south slope, though, is we had really early fields. We were able to get on them early, we were able to get planted early, and we were able to get that solar gain, and stuff grew really well in the spring. The problem is that had very little water, so we drilled 3 wells, and we still max would get about 8 to 10 gallons a minute between the 3. It was also meant that every time we built a greenhouse, we were carving a new shelf into the hillside. And so our slope was between a 5 and 15 degree slope, so a little bit challenging there. But the beauty of it is it was, dry ground. It never flooded, and it kind of built our home base. So kind of as our farm grew, that was our home base. That was our coolers, our greenhouses, our shop, our office. And then we rented 6 other, by the time, in 2015 we shut down, we were renting 6 other pieces of property in the area. So let's talk a little bit about some other challenges we faced. In 2011, by this time we were renting multiple other pieces of property. 2011, we had Hurricane Irene come in, and Hurricane Irene came up the coast, came right into Vermont and New York, and dumped 12 inches of rain in a little over 12 hours. And I remember actually standing in one of our fields and actually watching the water rise. I was standing there, we put a little levee in. I talked to my excavator and was like, hey, it's going to rain a lot. Could you come down here? And we got this one issue that water kind of flows into our field from this other area. I'd like to put a little levee in just to kind of prevent that. He was like, all right, cool. A couple hours later, we built it. So I was just standing there watching the water rise and just came right over and started pouring right into the field. And at that point, I knew there was not much we could do. It ended up flooding, the local McDonald's. It ended up, covering a lot of the bridges and roads in our area. And that one field ended up getting about 4 to 6 feet of water in it, depending on where you were. And it just kind of, the water ran so heavily, it just took all our squash plants and all the plastic we had laid for that squash and sent it, down the river and it's wrapped into trees. And it was a mess to clean up. But, one of the things that came of that is we luckily had been very conservative with our cash that year. And so we were sitting on, I think, like $30,000 in the bank as we got into August, which is when that happened. And so immediately on realizing that about a third of our winter probably half of our winter storage crops, we lost all our Brussels sprouts, all our leeks, our sweet potatoes, our beets, carrots, winter squash, all that kind of stuff was not going to be able to be harvested. We were able to trim back our team dramatically and really just really hunker down. We did end up having to take a loan from my brother to get us through that winter. And we got really creative. So like I said, the sweet potatoes, we weren't allowed to sell them because they said, you can sell them because they're underground, but you'd have to cook them. So we ended up turning a lot of those into sweet potato biscuits. And we took our beets and we cooked those and cleaned those up and turned those into a beet salad that we sold. So we kind of tried to make, lemonade out of the lemons, even though we still ended up probably with $100,000 loss from the crops we lost that year. But that kind of gave us a really good idea of the variability and the calamity that can happen with farming because you're dealing with Mother Nature all the time. And so, we still ended up farming that field in the future because it was prime ground and it was pretty much chocolate cake soil. But what we did is we made sure we split up our plantings, that we were not going to put all our fall crops in one area. So that was a major challenge that we faced there. Now, as we kind of scaled the company, we also started changing our growing style. First, we were on like a 30-inch or a 4-foot bed. Then we switched to running everything on a tractor bed. And so we picked up more equipment. At the end there, we had quite the arrangement of equipment. We had everything from bed formers to tillers to vegetable tractors to cultivation equipment to manure spreaders and larger sprayers. So we were really at the end there farming between 13 and 15 acres of actual vegetable production. And then we were managing around a total of 500 acres. Now, about 300 of that was woods for a woodlot. We also managed about 100, 150 acres of pasture, which we did some animals on. And then we also managed about 15 acres of vegetables, and about 50 of that was tillable total. And so we did a rotation on that with some large cover crops. So at the end, when we in 2014, kind of, which was a good year for us, we were, crushing it. We were doing great at the farmers markets, still had a couple hundred member CSA. We were split about in 3 directions for our marketing. About 20% was going wholesale. And in 2014, we were certified organic. So we were running down to the co-ops, selling large quantities to some distributors. About 40% was our CSA. And we ran a CSA that 90% picked up at the farmer's market. So it was a free choice CSA. And so they could come to the farmer's market. They would get 7 or 8 items and they could pick that right off our stand based on what their needs were for that week. So that really was kind of our hybrid CSA model and really made it work for us. And, we were able to do a lot better entry into the marketplace to people that really would not have been a good fit for traditional CSA because of our style. So the last 40% of our business was direct to consumer at the farmers markets. And so we grew a wide range of crops, everything from artichokes to zucchini and a lot of in-between crops. And that was kind of our thing. Now, we weren't the most profitable farm, but I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. So our marketing strategy was that we grew a lot of little things so that we were the stand to come to. So to that thing, we were doing squash blossoms. We did some cut sunflowers. We did cherry tomatoes and regular tomatoes and green beans and purple beans. So we were the one-stop shop. People frequently came to the farmer's market, shopped with us, and then didn't need to shop for any other vegetables because of that. And so that's why our market customers would come and spend probably from $10 to $25 with us. They're staying a larger amount. Whereas if we had focused on, let's say 10 or 12 crops, we would have, sold them less crops at a lower price point, but probably made far more per item because our costs would have been a lot more streamlined. So that was kind of our business model. And when we recommend farmers we recommend starting with a very narrow business model and crop focus, and get really good at growing those, and then add different crops as you grow. So that was kind of how we were set up. We were still running 21 gross profit margin. That for us meant that, 79% was covering the employee payroll. That was covering our payments on equipment and that sort of thing. That was also, replacing existing equipment. That wasn't going out and buying a brand new piece of equipment that was new to us and a new part of our business. So if, like, say we were replacing a manure spreader, that would have had to fall under that 79%. If we had decided to, add a bale chopper, that would have fallen under the new 21% gross profit as a new initial purchase for us. That's at least how we were classifying it with our bookkeeper at the time. So yeah, that's kind of where we're running. And for that size vegetable business, that's actually really good. We talked to a couple other farmers that were in our relative size. We were running between 30 and 40% labor costs, which was on the high side. Again, we weren't as efficient as we could have been. As the years progressed in the farm, I started to get a little bit more bored with just the day-to-day management. And so I really started moving into more of the R&D side. So we started to build some of our own equipment. We put in a complete weld shop so that we could start doing our own fabbing and manufacturing of different tools. And we had a lot of fun with that. I really enjoyed that. So I really wasn't focused on the, making sure to squeeze every single dollar out of that business. And you can see that in our bottom line. Now, in 2012, kind of to that R&D of getting a little bit bored, I turned 25 and was like, I'm having a quarter life crisis. I need to go do something different. I'm starting to get a little bit antsy. So one of the things that we worked in, my big picture thinking with this whole vegetables, is we knew vegetable farming is incredibly hard on the soil compared to, let's say, a regenerative grass-based farm where you're bringing in a lot of carbon and you're sequestering that. Vegetables is really hard on the soil and usually breaks down the soil over years. So my end goal was to build a farm where I could have most of the farm in animal production with a very small amount of highly intensive vegetable production, and the animals would provide the fertility for that vegetable side. Now, I really didn't have that strength. So I wanted to say, hey, I really should go to Polyface, do their internship program. What better way to learn, what better connections to get. I'm all about building connections in our industry and even in other industries and finding out what other people know. And so what better place to do that at Polyface? So that was why 2012, I ended up doing that internship where I did meet my wife and we ended up getting married the next year. But that was kind of a bump in the road for the farm. We lost money that year, definitely. I did not do a good job of setting up the team for success while I left. And so I left 4 managers over different areas of the business. Instead of leaving one person in charge, the 4 people all were trying to maintain their areas of the business and allocate the resources towards that. So that ended up being kind of challenging. So yeah, I would definitely have done that differently. 2013 actually was our most profitable year ever. I came back from Polyface. We really had dialed in some things, and it was a great growing season. We actually had very little rain, but that allowed us to put the water on when we needed it, where we needed it with our great irrigation system. And so the crops really benefited from that. And so we were able to really take that to the next level and grow a huge array of crops. The pictures from that year are just fabulous. Potatoes rolling out of the ground, a field of broccoli. Yeah, we filled all our coolers to overflowing, and we had to rent cooler space that year, just all the fall crops coming in. Now, let's talk a little bit about our business model. So we talked a little bit about our marketing, but we were a true 4-season farm. And what that meant is our goal was to have a crop at the farmer's market as long as we could throughout the season. So what that meant is that potatoes, carrots, beets, lettuce, spinach, the core crops for us, we had 12 months a year. And that was the ability because we had great storage facilities. So let's say we were selling potatoes from the previous year into the end of June. July 4th, our new potatoes will start coming out of the ground. And then we would pull out the rest of the potato crop somewhere in late September and then store all the way through the winter. Same thing with carrots, same thing with beets. Our greens, we grew in greenhouses during the winter. And then we would do overwintered spinach and stuff in the field. And then we would, as soon as we finished up in the greenhouses, pulled the greenhouses out of greens and put them into tomatoes and peppers. We would move outside to spinach from the field. So our goal was really to have a true 4-season farm. We would even do extension with freezing. So our strawberries, we grew more strawberries than we knew we could sell fresh. We were able to keep our price point very high because anything we had extra, we then immediately froze, stuck into the freezer, and would sell those throughout the fall and winter to our CSA and to the farmer's market as a frozen product. So that gave us a great, about availability with that cropping. So yeah, that was kind of how we were set up. It worked really well for us. It allowed us to really own the market with a lot of, having that season extension, that we were the people that would always have something. And, I learned that really from Paul and Sandy is, their whole thing of being very consistent. For them, one of their core crops has always been head lettuce. They want to always have head lettuce at the farmer's market. Now, when we met them, actually, they were not doing salad mix. And so we actually really started owning that. They ended eventually a couple of years later, I think, saw how well it was working for us, moved back into the salad mix, especially when Salanova came out. And so now I know that's a large portion of their business as well. But that was kind of, our focus. And, we really focused on looking at new crops and saying, how can we grow that? How can we make that profitable? For us, we tried sweet potatoes in a hoop house one year. It wasn't as profitable as we wanted, waited a couple of years, had enough global climate change to actually start growing them outside, and actually did quite well with them. The right soil, the right variety on green plastic in the field to get the maximum heat retention in there. And they actually did quite well. We were getting about 2 pounds per plant. So let's kind of talk about the shutting it down, why we chose that. So that really wasn't, my first choice. I really loved the farm, even though I was kind of getting a little bored with the actual production side. We were at that point really looking for 2014, bringing a manager on to kind of manage the farm and allow me to do a lot more of the education. Because I was moving into speaking 4 to 6 times a year and starting to do some consulting and doing, again, as I said, a lot of the R&D, and really enjoyed that, and focusing on the marketing. So we knew we really wanted to scale the business. We knew our marketing was going to have to scale to make that happen. So that's where I was moving as my job description. But got married in 2013. We got pregnant. My wife got pregnant with Charlotte. And we had the kid, and she really wanted to be near her family. And I kind of knew that getting married, that she wanted to be near her family when we had kids. I always thought that was going to be a couple of years down the road. And by that point, we could, work something out or keep the farm afloat somehow. But, at that point, we decided it would probably be best if we moved to Ohio for at least a couple of years. And what we decided at that point is, let's take a year or two off from the farm. We had a couple employees that worked for us for a number of years. They seemed like they could start to manage a lot of, and they were kind of a second tier management. So they were managing pieces of the business. And so we're like, well, we could just lease it out to them or sell the business to them or that kind of thing until we want to come back. And so, we kind of worked out something with them. They ended up just really leasing the land and a lot of the equipment. And we passed it over to them. And so we moved to Ohio. For me, I started actually working for a greenhouse manufacturer, one of the ones in the industry, kind of doing sales and innovation for them. That didn't last very long, as that company wasn't a very financially stable company in a challenging work environment. So we ended up working locally in Ohio with a manufacturing plant. They brought me on to kind of help build their team, as well as kind of implement, lean manufacturing on their plant floor, which we actually did a pretty good job of that. We leaned up a lot of their practices. Really excited to see how that direction of that company went. And then after that, I actually got offered a job to work for a billionaire in the Hudson Valley who decided he wanted to build a dream farm that would sell into New York City. Now, what I'd kind of been sold on with this farm was that they wanted to do a lot of R&D. And again, my background, I love messing with different things. I love figuring out what fertilizers work better. If you use leaf compost versus, animal compost versus hay compost, is that going, what's the growing going to be different on that? So that's kind of what he promised, is that we would have multiple greenhouses and I could do all sorts of that. But then kind of what it kind of moved into after I've been there a couple months is that it went from, this doesn't need to make money because I'm a billionaire, to, I think that this farm is going to make more money than my hedge fund, and I'm very excited about that possibility. So we should, double down and forget the R&D and just focus on, making the thing make money for us. So that kind of ended. We moved on from that. It was a very interesting 3 months of our lives just to kind of see how that kind of thing played out. And I actually know they've gone through several other people since then. And I actually think the farm is kind of non-existent right now. But it was a very interesting opportunity, and just to see that side of society and how that works. So kind of what happened to the farm then? We kind of left it with kind of the understanding we were going to be maybe gone for 2 years and maybe end up move a lot of that to Ohio and restart them. Well, we kind of leased it out to these 2 employees, and, they rapidly kind of ran it into the ground, just kind of watching the kind of decisions they made. They thought, with year 1, they were going to do 10 acres of production, even though they'd never managed a farm. And we strongly encouraged them to rapidly scale back and just focus on a couple markets. We said, look, the customers are there. You got the crew that are there, but you don't understand everything it takes to manage a 13-acre vegetable farm and, the thousands of decisions I make on a weekly basis to keep everything afloat. At that point, we had 20 employees. We had, a business that was pushing $500,000 in gross sales. And, we were moving tractor trailer loads of product over the year. Not all at once, but, we would send out full box trucks to different places. So there was a lot going on. And so, they didn't follow the systems that we had put in place. They didn't want to take the advice that what had worked for us. They decided they want to drink beer at 11 a.m., which I'm, completely open to doing what you want. But there needs to be a level of seriousness that you take your business, understanding, what that looks like. And so, rapidly came to the point that they could not pay us for, the lease amounts. And they ended up, the 2 of them ended up not deciding to remain partners. And so, that ended up just dissolving. And that was really, really, really tough for me. I'd spent 10 years building that business and thought I'd kind of passed it on to someone that could actually maintain that, or at least a resemblance of that. And to kind of start hearing from customers who I'd gladly passed on to these new guys and saying, hey, look, there's some guys taking over, highly recommend them. And them saying, yeah, Michael, there was like 5 things to choose from for CSA this week, or something like that. That just was really challenging for me, and just to watch the whole thing kind of implode upon itself. And within, 12 months, they had lost pretty much all the employees that we had that kind of passed on to them. So again, I think people here might say, you're really hard on those people. They took it over. They're doing their own thing. And they can totally do what they want to do, but they weren't running it like a business. And that's kind of what we teach here in our company, is that a farm is a business, needs to be run like one, and you need to treat it with that seriousness so you're making the right financial decisions so you can be around the next year to be profitable and keep yourself going. And so, at that point, it was really starting to think about why they failed and start to try to dissect that. And at the same time, also start to see other farms failing. That's where we came up with our Ripen system that we work with farmers now. And we'll go into that on a different podcast episode, and that stands for routine, innovation, production mastery, the engine of your company, which is your team and your systems, and finally your N for the needs of your customers, which is your marketing. So that's kind of the system that we work on, the framework. We'll do our upcoming episode all about that, how that works. And if you've watched one of our webinars, you've probably seen that before. But, watching these farms, other places fail, and looking at why they failed, even farmers that were doing the same farmers markets as us. We watched multiple ones go out of business. And so we started to develop that. So let's talk a little bit about I wouldn't say mistakes, because at the time they were probably a great idea of what we decided we wanted to do, but things I would have probably done differently as we built the business. And again, as I'm saying, I thoroughly enjoyed those 10 years. It was a great education. I wouldn't trade it for anything. There's a ton of memories I had there that were incredible. We made friendships that we still keep to this day. I met so many cool people around the farming industry that I still keep up with. And it really opened a lot of doors to kind of do what we do now. So, a lot of the interviews we had for the podcast came from, contacts I made over those years. That was, it's been great. It's kind of just been more like a reunion party, catching up with them on the podcast and seeing where they are. But let's talk with some things that I would have changed. For one, we had the wrong piece of property. It was very challenging to do what we did there. It was the right purchase for my parents at that moment because we didn't know what we wanted to do. But we probably, if I were to do it over again, would have tried for a different piece of property that was more suited to exactly what we were trying to do. We spent an awful lot of time and effort trying to deal with the wind on top of that hill, as well as getting up and down that hill in the wintertime. So the other thing is we made some mistakes with renting land. We didn't treat our landlords with probably the seriousness we should have and communicate as well as we could have. And so we had some dicey situations there. We, ended up working those out, and we had a great land base, some of the best soils in the US we were farming. But it was still a couple of years and a couple properties, which I would have done things differently there and put better leases in place. I would have, been a lot more communicative. We brought some wrong equipment. And I guess in any instance, that's probably, you're going to do that. You're going to make some bad mistakes. But I probably could have listened to my mentors a bit more and not bought the $25,000 tractor, which ended up selling 12 months later. Granted, we didn't lose too much on that one, but it was definitely still a year of, messing and struggling with the wrong piece of equipment. The other thing is we did not plan this. This kind of started with just hey, let's start a farm. Now, granted, because we were 15 and 16, that was probably how most 15 and 16-year-olds go about that. But we probably should have sat down, and we did planning along the way. We would sit down at the end of the year. We'd go through the CSA. But we didn't plan for the long-term health of this business as putting it forward for the future of our customers. I know that when we left the area, we left a hole in the marketplace. And, Paul, I was back there last year for an event, and an old customer saw me and said, "Michael, it's so good to see you. Are you back? Are you farming again? I can't wait to buy from you." I had to tell him I was just there for a charity event for the nonprofit farm we started up there. And I was just there for that and just to hang out and meet them and say hi. But it was something that, I wish that there was our type of business still in that area, because it had a very special niche that we filled, and it was a great thing for that area. And I would have also thought about the long-term succession. So we left it where we couldn't have sold the business very well. We were able to lease it out. We were able to cash out the equipment, but the business should have been able to be sold for probably twice what we were able to get for the equipment and stuff, because it was an actual working business. And because we didn't build it on its own property, I built it on my parents' property. That would have been an incredible challenge to sell all of, it's hard to break the office, which is in the basement, away from my parents' house, or all the greenhouses were within sight of my parents' house. So it's been hard to split that property. It was also, again, as the last couple of years, I was more focused on the R&D aspect, which was great, but I wasn't focused on the profitability. So the profitability of the business was probably, I would say, half of what it could have been, even though we were doing quite well and very well for our size business. There was a lot of crops we grew just because I wanted to. Our newer customers liked getting little bits of it. And we also had a lot of waste too. So we were tilling under a lot of stuff. We didn't focus on making sure that everything was a pull marketing versus a push marketing. So frequently we have extra crop and be like, I got to call someone and try to figure out how to sell this crop, instead of, this crop is for this person and we're going to crop out 100% and sell it, or at least let's say 90%. And, we didn't own our land too. So we rented a lot of it. And that was another challenge too, with just dealing with landowners and not being able to make long-term permanent plans on that land, with putting up hoop houses and having irrigation available for that. So there's just some things that were kind of hobnobbed together as the business grew. And part of that was, and I'm not going to fault us 100%, because part of that is that we were actively working on this Saratoga farm project, which was the goal was to move our farm into the Saratoga city. And there was a property for that. We were starting the goals of that. And it ended up, when we ended up moving from the area, we ended up just turning that into a nonprofit, preserving the land. And now it has a community garden and a farm on it. And it's being run by a nonprofit now. So the land ended up being conserved, but that was why some of those reasons, and we did not focus on buying new land to build that on. But it did make it very challenging when we wanted to, let's say, sell that. The other thing is we had our name attached to the name of that business. It was Kilpatrick Family Farm. And I did not really want other people running Kilpatrick Family Farm with my name attached. So that was another challenge we faced there. But, so kind of what I would say is, if you were going to, what I would say, my advice from this episode, the takeaways would be, build with the end in mind. Always think about your exit plan. Whether it be, look, I'm going to retire here. That's my goal. I'm going to build this so that when I want to stop farming, everything can be easily converted. Or I'm going to retire. I want to sell this. I want to build it as a system, and so that someone can take over for me. And, you really should make your farm work for you. You do not have to make your farm look like everyone else's farm. So, we had mentors, Paul and Sandy, Eric Pillemer. Our farm was very different than both of them. And, there was obviously feedback on that, but I loved what I was doing. I enjoyed building the farm the way we did. We had a lot of fun on our farm with our crew. They loved us. We would do pizza night every so often. We would celebrate birthdays. We had employee parties. Every Friday night, we took the crew down and bought ice cream at the local car hop. I paid for it, and we just hang out. So we would go to their games. We had a very young crew. We hired a lot in the homeschool community. And it was kind of like a rite of passage to start working at our farm for some of these families. They'd reach the age to get their working papers, and they would start working for us. So that was, we really enjoyed that. We really knew that we were working on, growing the next generation of people who are familiar with organic agriculture. And another point I would say is with the transition to the people that took over is people don't appreciate what they haven't built. And so, whereas I knew every single, with the tractors we had, a $25,000 tractor, I knew the blood, sweat, and tears that went into buying every single nut and bolt on that thing. And so they didn't really appreciate it. And so obviously when they were renting it from us, they did not treat it like we did. And so there was a number of things that were damaged and that we ended up never recouping because they went out of business. And, I just have to say, I am incredibly grateful to my family and to my parents for letting us do what we did. My mom put up with, crew eating lunch in the house, with her front yard being tilled up, with us tracking in mud into the basement, with having people at all times, all hours of the day, just kind of come around. And she did that with grace. She did that with just opening up her kitchen and feeding them. My dad, the first year loaned us money. And then actually, because we were still too young to have a business in our name, kind of put his name on the line by, signing, co-signing on the loans for stuff. And, there was always bumps along the way, but they still took an incredible leap of faith and didn't say no, just kind of let us do it. And like, okay, we'll along for the ride. So I really appreciate that. One thing I would say is I do regret because we didn't make the farm, and yes, it was a business, but we did not run the numbers like we should have on a lot of stuff, is we did not pay. We paid well. We did not pay as well as we could have. We did put a couple kids through college, but they worked a lot of hours for that. So I wish we had, and we paid prevailing wage in our area for the farms, but I wish we had been pushing more that pencil line so we could have paid better. And I wish I had paid my siblings better too. So I think always we tend to undervalue our family and what they put into it. And I know that a lot of my siblings worked for us for a number of years and they put everything into the farm. And, when we shut it down, they didn't get out what they put into that. So I wish I had, changed that. Then one thing. And I think the thing for me was shutting it down in 2015. That was incredibly challenging for me because I was farm. The farm was, that was my identity. I loved it. I did it every hour I could. If I wasn't farming, I was researching. I was visiting other farms. I was making connections. I was going to conferences. And so that was my identity. And it was very challenging when I stepped away to figure out what my new identity was. And so that's kind of, the different jobs I took. That was challenging. So really think about your identity is not what your work is. You need to think about yourself as outside of your work and really be comfortable with that you can do anything and, you're just in this for a season. And I think the final thing I'll say is so often I see farmers get into a farm and get stuck there. They don't know how to get out. I remember talking to somebody online. It's like, oh yeah, I can't not farm because of my customers. I'm like, yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, my customers were the reason we farmed. We loved feeding their families. We loved watching the kids grow up. We loved going to their house and helping and having them serve us our food, which we grew for them. That was a fabulous way. And we really, really enjoyed that. But if you need to step away and at that time, to make our marriage work, and I did need to step away and move to Ohio. So that was something that, I had to just say, you know what, we're shutting this down. Doesn't mean it's down forever. It just means we're taking a pause at this moment. And so if you need to do that in your business, there's nothing wrong with that. One of the interviews that will be coming up is Darren Doherty. And Darren said something very interesting to me. He said, you know what, if your personal context or your personal self-realization is that farming is not for you full time, or that it's just going to be something that you're doing a very small part of your time, that's completely okay. What you have to realize is you are moving the movement forward, you are feeding people, and you are making change at the level you can. It doesn't mean that you have to be in it full time, that you've had success by doing that. So I think, that's something you have to think about is, figure out what your success looks like on your farm, really go internal and know what your capacity is for what you're doing. And it's okay to stop and rethink life and retool it, especially because, when you, as my friend Ray Tyler likes to say, when you die, you're not going to talk about your farm. You're going to talk about the family relationships, those people who are surrounding you. And you can kind of, that's going to be your legacy, is the people you touched, not the vegetables you grew. All right, I'm going to wrap up that episode here. Hope that's been helpful. Hope kind of giving us a little bit of a background of, where I was, what we did. And obviously there's parts of this that I could go into a lot deeper. Like I'd love to talk about an entire episode on the equipment we had. We had some incredible equipment, kind of the innovations we had, kind of the crop planning we did and how we figured that out to make sure that we had those crops 12 months out of the year. But that's kind of, the basic overview of our story. And again, hope that has helped you kind of as you're thinking your journey, as you're thinking what you want to do with your life. And, for someone who was just a teenager and stained, ripped jeans, growing vegetables, I never thought that I'd be where I was with the journey we've had. But yeah, it was an amazing journey. I really appreciated every step along the way, even though now, on the time, it was quite challenging to kind of move through a lot of that. But it gave me an immense breadth of experience and just, I think, empathy and sympathy for those who, are going through similar challenges. So there you have it, another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please pop on over to the Thriving Farmer podcast website and leave us a review. That's thrivingfarmerpodcast.com.